what buyers define value as is progress. If I had a meeting with you as a seller, the value is, am I closer to making a decision? Have I made progress toward making a decision as a result of this interaction? That has value. In the absence of that, there was no value.
That's right. And there's actually a couple more words. You're right. Progress is a powerful motivator, but there's a second component of motivation kind of at the top of the list of motivation, which is meaning. And actually, I think from the progress principle, they say making progress in meaningful work. And that's where these sort of reactive tasks are so deceiving, because it feels like, yep, read that email, check, made progress, right? One fewer email in my inbox, made progress, but it wasn't meaningful progress.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. That was Maura Thomas, and she's the author of a book titled Attention Management: How to Create Success and Gain Productivity Every Day. And Maura is joining me today on Sales Enablement, episode 784, to talk about individual personal productivity. Now, Maura's going to share with us why time management is not the solution to increasing personal productivity, because when distraction is the enemy, and that distraction comes in an increasing number of digital forms, the cure is what Maura calls attention management. And we'll dig into why we're thinking about productivity all wrong and how to manage your attention. If you think of your attention as an asset that you're trying to manage, we'll talk about how to manage your attention and accomplish that in a communications economy, which is driven and profits by holding and capturing your attention, otherwise distracting you. So we're going to dive into some very specific strategies and tips Maura has for managing and eliminating the distractions that are bleeding away your attention and your productivity. So all this and much, much more. But before we get to Maura, I will let you know that the whole team of people who work here to produce this podcast are incredibly grateful for all of you who support us by listening to the show, telling your friends, and sharing it on social media, and most importantly, subscribing to the show and giving us your feedback in the form of a rating and review. And if you haven't already connected with me on LinkedIn, please do. You can search for me, Andy Paul, or the usual preamble on LinkedIn /real Andy Paul. All right, let's jump into it with Maura. Maura Thomas, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Andy. Happy to be here.
Well, it's nice to meet you. You're joining us from where today?
From sunny Austin, Texas today.
Sunny Austin, Texas. That sounds nice. It's not sunny where I am. In fact, the windows are rattling because the wind's blowing so hard.
Beautiful day here in Austin, Texas.
But the question is, since we're recording this in the middle of the great COVID shutdown, is can you leave the house?
Not really. I mean, we go out and exercise, hikes, and bike rides and that kind of thing. But our big outing these days is the grocery store.
Fully masked up and gloved up, right?
Yep.
Got to do it. Yeah, it's a different experience these days. So it makes you wonder, when's it going to be a point in time when we feel comfortable going to the grocery store without a mask and gloves?
It's such a new world. I'm wondering if handshakes are gone forever.
Well, yeah, I've thought about that. It's a good question, especially when you're in sales. You're out meeting people all the time. Depending on the job, is you could be out all the time meeting customers in the field. Is like, yeah, maybe we're all, adopt bowing as the new custom.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. That's for sure. And my work involves so much travel. I'm wondering when I'm going to feel comfortable getting on a plane again. Yeah,
well, I on the plane usually 4 times a month. That's like, I worry the same thing. Or not worry, but wonder about the same thing. Is actually my wife and I have our first airline flight booked for the 28th of this month, which is May. That we're recording this, and it's like, okay, we're going to do it. We got to do it. So it's like, okay, be prepped, which we were the last time we flew right before the shutdown went into effect, is, masks, gloves, sanitizing wipes to wipe down our area, all that stuff. So brave new world. So
for sure.
All right, I'm glad you're joining us because we're going to talk about your book, Attention Management: How to Create Success and Gain Productivity Every Day. And now productivity is a big topic of mine that I'm always fascinated to talk to people about. So I choke on my words. How do you define productivity?
It's a great question because we throw around words and it's so important to know if we're all on the same page. So thanks for asking. There's a very specific definition of the word productive that guides my work, and it is achieving or producing a significant amount or result. Now, there's a sort of a manufacturing piece or a production piece in that definition, producing an amount. But if we take that piece out, what we're left with, I think, is the personal productivity piece, achieving a significant result. So how productive you are is how much progress you have made on the results that are significant to you. And you get to define significance.
Yeah, I'm glad you defined that for us, because that aligns with what I believe productivity is in part. I mean, in sales, you have outcomes, right? You're getting an order for a certain amount of revenue. But I look at it as that if you're doing activity that isn't going to contribute to producing an outcome, then by definition, isn't that perhaps unproductive work?
Well, and a significant outcome at that.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that we spend so much of, it's very easy for our days to pass where all we do is react. We answer emails, we answer the phone, we answer instant messages, chats, communication. We react to all of those things. And at the end of the day, you feel like you didn't even have a minute to breathe, but you actually got really nothing done.
Yeah, even though you felt like you got a lot done. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So you had an interesting phrase in the book. I'm interested in your interpretation of it. You said, quote, we undervalue the achievement and overvalue the importance of the interruption. So tell us what you meant by that.
Yeah, I had an example from a client that I think just shows how true this is so clearly. I teach in my sessions that people should close out their email so that they can do important work. So this guy, we'll call him Joe. He had this really important project, like job was riding on the success of this kind of project that he had to do to get done. It was due. And he didn't close his email. And he got an email from his boss. And he felt good that he was checking all of the emails as they came in while he was doing this project, because one of them was from his boss, and he was able to respond to his boss immediately with the answer that his boss was looking for. And he said, see, I would have missed that had I closed out my email. And I said, but how much longer did it take you to do the project? Yeah, but my boss is really important. So then I said, well, let's talk to your boss. Was that really urgent? Was that worth interrupting to get the answer to that question? The boss said, no, I would have just gotten it from someone else. It wasn't that important at all. But Joe said to me, but see, he would have gotten it from someone else. So it's such a good thing that it was some sort of contest, right? That he had to be the one to answer his boss immediately. Yes. Never mind that he was interrupted while he was doing the project, that it was a critically important project, that it took him much longer to do it, that it needed more proofreading when he was done. Never mind all that. He could answer his boss immediately.
Well, it sort of gets to that point about sort of having a mindset of scarcity, right? I mean, Joe was thinking, well, there's not enough credit to go around, so I need to make sure I grab some of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, which creates and it contributes to distractions, right? And so you say that distraction is not the problem, or distraction is the problem. So it's time management isn't the issue. You talk about being able to manage our attention. So define attention.
Attention to me, well, I'll define attention management as sort of I use it in my work. But attention management is a combination of behaviors where the end result, when you are managing your attention effectively, is that you can recognize the brain state that you're in and shift to the state that will serve you in the moment. So in the book, I define 4 brain states, and of course it's an oversimplification, but 4 brain states: reactive and distracted, focused and mindful, daydreaming or mind wandering, and flow. Now, all of those except for flow is something that we can choose, right? We can either allow distractions and be reactive and distracted. We can allow our mind to wander, or we can decide that we are going to be focused on a thing. Flow is something that happens to your brain on its own, but if you focus for long enough, you might get lucky enough to tip into flow, and it's a brain state that your brain enters all on its own. So if you are managing your attention successfully, you can recognize, look, I am actually feeling reactive and distracted. My email's open. People are dropping by my office, but I need to be focused and mindful to get this report done, for example. So I'm not in the right brain state to get the right results for this task that is ahead of me, or this experience I'm having, or this moment that I'm in, or this conversation. What brain state do I need to be in? And am I in the right one? And if not, I need to shift. When you can do that, then you are managing your attention successfully.
Well, I think it's useful because as I was reading the book, it called to mind a study that had been done by Herbert Simon, who was a Nobel Prize winner, who had written this white paper in the early 70s saying that there's a very interesting paper because he basically forecasts the internet well before its existence, saying there will come a time in the future where we have so many sources of information contending for our attention. And he said, the part of the study was, well, how do we decide how to allocate, he called it slices of our attention, to which sources of information? And I think it's really useful for people to sort of think about attention as this, in a physical way. I mean, it's like, if you're a telecom person, you think about bandwidth, right? Our limited resources, bandwidth in this communications pipe. Well, it's pretty similar with attention, right? Is how are you allocating? You got this finite amount of this physical resource, attention. How do you just make decisions how to slice it and how to devote which portions of that to which sources of information? Because these are, to your point, these sources of information can be a distraction or they can help you make progress. Exactly.
And I think Herbert Simon's work was so prescient. And I quote him in the book. A quote I saw from him is one of the things that sort of led me down this path of attention management, where he says, what information consumes is rather obvious. It consumes the attention of its recipient. Therefore, a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. And that is exactly our problem, is that there is so much information, and that information isn't passive. That information gets pushed to us through our technology. And so it leaves very little attention left for us to direct to the things that are most important to us.
Yeah, well, the thing that was interesting I thought about Simon's work, though, is that he said that we tend to make economic decisions about how we're going to allocate slices of our attention, that we prioritize based on sort of an ROI on the use of that time. Have we lost that ability to do that?
I think I'm not sure that I'm qualified to say whether or not we've lost it, but what I will say is that we have become so habituated to distraction that we don't often make conscious choices, because by definition, a habit is something that we do without even thinking, usually. And so we are so used to, studies show, Gloria Mark's work shows that we switch what we're doing about every 3 minutes, usually in response to some sort of external or internal stimulus. Either I'm bored, so let me go look at my phone, or my phone just dinged at me, so let me look at it.
And then we have the settling time, as you talked about, to get re-engaged.
That's right. Which could take anywhere from a few minutes to a few hours, depending on the amount of what I call brain power momentum you had built up on that task.
Yeah, and I've used this example in talking with sales teams, and I was giving a webinar but a seminar. Sorry, so accustomed to saying webinar these days. I was actually there giving the seminar.
I remember those days.
Team of about 100 sellers, and I said, so who keeps their personal phone on their desks when they're in the middle of their call block. They're making proactive outbound calls. And virtually everybody raises their hand.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, okay, how many of you will look at your phone if you're in the middle of a phone call and you get a notification, you get an email, you get a social update, something happens. And they all raise their hands, virtually everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting thinking, gosh, you just spent, your company and you combined have spent all this time and energy to be able to connect with this person on the phone. You get them on the phone, and the first thing you do is let your attention wander.
That's right. That's right. We've gotten to the point, we've become so habituated to distraction that doing only one thing at a time has become boring. We are so used to sitting on the couch watching TV and scrolling through Facebook, eating dinner and watching TV or reading a book, riding an elevator and looking at our phone, right? We've lost what I call those in-between moments where we have that opportunity to let our minds wander, which is where insights come from.
Exactly.
And not only that, but we just can't. Doing two things at once has become the standard because only one at a time is just boring.
Well, it's boring, or we fear being alone by ourselves.
Yeah. There's a Ned Hallowell, psychiatrist, calls it looking into the void, right? That self-reflection that happens sometimes when we are alone with our thoughts. And many people would rather do just about anything than self-reflect.
Yeah. Well, so it gets this idea that you talk about daydreaming. I call it rumination. You're talking about one of the sort of three states is this daydreaming, rumination, whatever, just letting your mind wander. People might think, well, that's a waste of your attention. Actually, it's hugely productive.
It's super productive. We have forgotten that just being is productive, because when our minds wander, and for me, I sort of see a difference between rumination and daydreaming. Rumination sounds a little bit more punitive to me. Rumination is kind of when I'm beating myself up about something that happened, or I should have said this, or I should have done that, or I should have handled that differently, or that's what I think of as rumination. To me, daydreaming is just sort of reflecting on what I've read or what I've seen or what I've heard or what I've done, and making connections and just, seeing what my brain produces, because that's when we get the solutions to problems. That's when we have an insight. Our brains are not obedient, right? You can't say to yourself, I will now solve the problem. Right? Your brain just doesn't work that way. You have to sort of, you have to get, there's a book called Nudge where they describe the elephant and the rider. Mm-hmm. I think it's in Nudge, where they write your consciousness is the rider and your brain is the elephant. The elephant is a very powerful beast if you let it do its thing, right? Sometimes the rider has to get off the elephant and just let the elephant do its thing.
Yeah, I've used this examples for sellers before, but again, I call it rumination. But I agree with you. It speaks to a little bit level of deliberation, perhaps, than daydreaming. But is that, since we've seemingly do it less, is everybody wants to sort of put things away. One thing's about the digital distractions, especially in sales. We're going to update Salesforce with the record of this call and this interaction we just had with this buyer. And then I'm not going to think about it again because I know it's in Salesforce. Mm-hmm. Whereas instead, it's like, but we need to keep whatever the term, rumination or daydreaming. It's got to be there because that's how we process what's going to happen next. Mm-hmm. And this isn't wasted time, to your point, as I think that a lot of people think it is, because I got to be doing something. It's like, no, this is hugely productive. This is how you solve problems. You can sit down to solve a math equation, but oftentimes, if it's something you haven't done before, you'll take a break. You may go take a shower. The solution will come to you in the shower.
Exactly.
One of my great fears in life is all the good thoughts come in the shower, and I don't write them down, or I have to make sure I'm conscious about writing them down as soon as I get out.
Yeah. Well, and because the shower is one of the few places these days, although not for much longer, where we don't have our phones in our hands.
I think I'll avoid having mine in there. I don't, how about you?
Yes, I think so. And I have seen, actually, I haven't seen them, but I have been told by a client that there are tile crayons,
There
right?
are.
So that you can, so that you can keep them in the shower, so that you can capture those great ideas that you have by writing on your shower tiles with the crayons.
I haven't ordered some. I may. That's going on my list here. I'm writing that down. But another key point you make about the idea of being distracted and our attention being diverted is that the technology sort of makes us think of we want to be able to consume things in fast, short, and simple ways. And the world is not short, fast, and simple.
Exactly. It conditions us to accept sound bites instead of really understanding something. And so as a result, we have a tiny bit of information about a breathtaking number of things and very and deeper knowledge about very few.
And I see this all the time with the way we represent data, like in graphic form. And obviously we live in the world of big data, and sales is a field where almost as much as any, or more so than any, we've got this influx of data about conversions, yada, 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 and behaviors. But very often people don't want to dig in and say, okay, well, what's really going on here? What's the context here? Daniel Levitin writes about this in his book, The Field Guide to Lies, is our sort of superficial understanding of all these data, because we don't want to your point in the book is, if we require something that's more cognitively demanding, it must be difficult.
Right. And I don't have time for that. I don't have the patience for that, because that's really one of the more insidious things about becoming habituated to distraction, is that not only does it chip away at our attention span and our ability to maintain our focus for any period of time, but it chips away at our patience. So we also don't have the desire to spend an extended period of time on anything, because we're too impatient. That's going to take too long. That's too hard. I don't have time for that right now. But yet, when we do those things, that is when we are the most satisfied. That is when we feel the most accomplished. That gives us that feeling of contentment and satisfaction at the end of our work days, when we get those meaty things done.
When we make progress. And I like the part you'd had the quote from psychologists just recently, Annabelle and Steve Kramer. It says, I guess is principle they call the progress principle.
Mm-hmm.
The single most important thing, of all the things that can boast, quote was, of all the things that can boost emotions, motivation, and perceptions during a workday, the single most important is making progress. And I find this so interesting, because on the buyer side, there's been a bunch of research done about buying behavior. And someone said, well, how do buyers define value when they're interacting with sellers? How do they define value? And because value is one of these great cliche terms we use in sales all the time. And what buyers define value as is progress. If I had a meeting with you as a seller, the value is, am I closer to making a decision? Have I made progress toward making a decision as a result of this interaction? That has value. In the absence of that, there was no value.
That's right. And there's actually a couple more words. You're right. Progress is a powerful motivator, but there's a second component of motivation, or the kind of at the top of the list of motivation, which is meaning, right? And actually, I think from the progress principle, they say making progress in meaningful work. Mm-hmm. And that's where these sort of reactive tasks are so deceiving, because, it feels like, yep, read that email, check, made progress, right? One fewer email in my inbox, made progress, but it wasn't meaningful progress. And so we don't feel particularly satisfied at the end of the day. And you're right, that salesperson could say, check, one more sales call I made. But if their customer didn't come closer to the buying decision, then it wasn't meaningful progress, and it matters much less.
Yeah. I mean, again, you talked about sort of the busyness part of things is, people wear that as a badge of honor as opposed to actually getting things done.
Exactly.
Well, I wanted to go through some of the tips you had about attention management. We sort of touched on some of them. You talked about turning your phone off when you're doing other things. I remember this another seminar I gave to a client where I talked about that. I said, when you're meeting with a client, either virtually or in person, and in this case, these people tend to meet with their clients in person, field sellers, I said, turn your phone off and put it in a backpack or a purse or leave it in the car. And had one woman in the group just said, I can't do that. I've got grade school age kids and I need to be available at all times. And it's like, well, how do you answer that?
It's interesting because you're exactly right. I would say in the car is the best recommendation, because a study out of Virginia Tech showed that having our phone in our presence, even if we can't see it, even if it's face down and silent, or if it's, in a pocket or in a bag, but still in the room, it lowers our cognitive capacity, according to the study. People performed better when their phone was in a different physical space. And when people say, I need to be available 100% of the time, the truth is, number one, they simply aren't, regardless. Even if they do have their phone with them, there are times when they are asleep, and there are times when they are in the restroom, although don't even get me started on phone use in the restroom. But number one, they aren't. And number two, generations of children grew up just fine without having their parents accessible to them every minute of every day, 24/7, 365. And the truth is, how long is that sales call? An hour? If you feel like you can't be away from your device for an hour, then I would suggest probably you don't need help with your productivity. You need help from a licensed mental health professional.
Well, yeah, I usually will preface that conversation as the seminar by holding up the phone and saying, this is a WMD. This is a weapon of mass distraction.
Mass distraction, exactly.
And people think, well, okay, if I leave in the car, then how am I going to set up the meeting with the buyer when at the end of the meeting? It's like, well, go get it.
Yeah.
I mean, alternatively, I'll suggest to sellers is what you do is you hold up your phone to the buyer and make a show of turning it off completely, powering it down at the start of the meeting, saying, this is a really important meeting. I'll make sure we're not disturbed. Turn the phone off. And then you sort of shame the buyer into doing the same thing.
Exactly. You're exactly right. Somebody asked me that in a virtual session I did the other day. How do you get other people to pay attention to you? It's like, sadly, we can't control what other people do. The only thing we can do is influence them to behave in the ways we would like them to behave. And one of the ways we can influence them is to model the behavior.
Yeah.
And that's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
So another thing you talk about is a recommendation for maintaining attention management is checking your email on scheduled intervals. And I think this is hugely important. And I'm not always, I have to admit, not always consistent with this. But like when I'm writing either a blog or I'm writing a book, as I'm in the process of writing now, my next book is, I go into composition mode that silences all notifications.
Yep. I would say scheduled is one word. Periodic intervals is another word. I don't necessarily, I think there are some people who make what I consider to be a mistake by publicly announcing, I check my email at 10 a.m., 2 p.m., and 4 p.m. And I think that the concept behind that is a good one. Periodically throughout the day, absolutely. But there's always going to be a time where you can't, because that means that everybody who sent you an email between, 7 a.m. or 7 p.m. last night and 10 a.m. this morning is going to expect a response from you at 10:01. Right? So, right. And there will be times where you can't keep to that schedule. And so I think it's useful to make it a little bit more fluid and check email periodically throughout the day rather than leaving email open and downloading all the time. Close it out, do what you need to do, and then decide, okay, for the next hour, I need to deal with my email. And then it's email time. The problem with that is that we have, as a society, I think, at least many of my clients have mistaken the availability of immediate communication with the imperative for immediate communication, right? Just because I could answer it immediately doesn't mean I have to. And so people are trying to use email as a synchronous communication device. What I tell my clients is if you're doing that, you're doing it wrong. Email is an asynchronous communication device, and you'll never get anything meaningful done if you try to read every email as it arrives.
Yeah, well, I agree. And I think you have to prioritize. I mean, I've seen instances in sales, and I advocate this, and it depends on the environment because it's not the same for all environments, where this ability to be responsive in a value-added way is a competitive advantage where it works for the buyers because the buyers are trying to work through something relatively quickly. I see buyers' motivation generally is they want to be able to quickly gather information to make a good decision with the least investment of time and effort possible. If you can help them achieve that, then that's to your advantage. But typically, you're doing that within a defined period of time within the day.
Yes, or through a defined channel, right? So I often suggest that people put a line in their email that says something like, because you're right, you don't want to leave your customers hanging. You want to give them a path to reach you if they need something in a time-sensitive manner, but email shouldn't be it. So I suggest people put a line in their email signature that says something like, I check my email periodically throughout the day. However, if you have a more urgent or time-sensitive need, please feel free to whatever, call me, text me, have me paged,
text me, yeah.
Whatever,
right.
Whatever the path is. And I think you can message that to your clients as a competitive advantage by saying, your work is important and I will do it better when I can do it in an undistracted way. And so as a result, I can't be checking every email as it arrives. And you'll get better work if I'm not.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So another thing you recommend, which I think is very useful, and I use them usually during sort of concentrated sprints or so on, is timers.
Yes.
I use a Pomodoro timer. So 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off, and stand up and walk around and do something different. What's your take on that?
The idea is that human beings gravitate naturally towards stopping points. And so we need to, oftentimes the way that we write things down on our to-do list or enter things into our to-do list is we enter it in a way that isn't really helpful. We'll say things like, or plan the strategy or roll out the product or even, write the book or things that are not really actionable.
Mm-hmm.
And so
they're
recommend
too macro.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so I recommend that people break things down into small bites. So be very specific in those small bites about, start the task when you write it down with an action verb, something that is actionable, right? Organize is an action verb, but it's not really actionable. What does that even mean? Like, how would you start that right at this moment? It requires thought. But something like, as opposed to organize the staff meeting, you might say email the staff about the meeting because that's very clear. It's actionable. You know exactly what it means.
Yeah. So David Allen would say before you could do that in his getting things done is you'd have to say, define what the agenda is, say, determine who needs to be invited. He would say you actually have like 6 or 7 pre-steps there. If you really break it down.
In that example, true.
Yeah.
Yes, there could be. But when it comes to that, those sprints, if you need to have some sort of stopping point. So, right, you and I working on books, we might say incorporate the edits from the publisher is something that is often on my to-do list, right? You send the chapter off, they send it back with all the track changes in it, right? And so incorporate the edits. Well, if I just said incorporate the edits and I've got 4 chapters to do, I'm going to skip that all day long. So I might say incorporate the edits for the first 5 pages, or incorporate the edits for chapter 2, or incorporate the edits for 30 minutes and use a timer. It doesn't really matter what the stopping point is. The point is you need to give yourself a stopping point. Now, you might build up enough activation energy, right? You might get rolling. You might have that brain power momentum that I talk about. And you might think, wow, I'm on a roll. I'm going to blow right through this timer or this stopping point that I've set. Great. Do that. But if you're having trouble with your focus when the timer goes off, or when you get to the end of the chapter or the 5 pages or whatever you've set at that stopping point, it's really useful to have a stopping point.
Yeah, I think the challenge for salespeople throughout this whole discussion we're having with Maura is in this idea of attention management, which is so critical, is that you have to break free from this idea that so much of what you do is sort of process driven and that you're on autopilot. And because attention management requires being deliberate about the choices you make. And this is oftentimes hard for sellers to understand, is that you have this choice, right? How are you going to spend this time or invest this time in a way that enables your buyers to make progress?
Well, and you're exactly right. And if you're going to, in order to add value, you need to be more than just transactional, right? And these reactive processes, answering emails, answering the phone, reacting to all the variety of distractions that assault us all day long, those are sort of transactional, as opposed to putting together a thoughtful proposal or report or analysis for your client to offer something that is really valuable beyond the transaction. You need to be thoughtful and undistracted for an extended period of time. So I really think that attention management is a competitive advantage for sales staff.
Oh, I agree. And so I urge people who are listening to buy this book. This is Maura promised when she sent it to me, you could read it in an hour or less, which I did, which promised delivered, which from a sales standpoint, always builds your credibility. The book's called Attention Management: How to Create Success and Gain Productivity Every Day. And yeah, I recommend people pick it up and read it. It's a quick, easy read, but a lot of great information in there. And Maura, how can people connect and find out more about what you're doing?
If your listeners want to assess their own level of attention management, I've created an assessment for that, and they can take that for free at maurathomas.com/assessment. And that will put them, based on their answers in the assessment, it will put them on the path and give them a starting point.
Excellent. All right. Well, Maura, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Andy.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. I'm so grateful for your support of this show. And I want to thank Maura Thomas for sharing her insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to this show. And if you could also leave us a rating or review and let us know how we're doing, we'd appreciate it. You can do all that on your phone in less than a minute as soon as this podcast is over. So thank you for your help. And thank you so much for investing in your personal development today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.